Right, just want to let everyone know that we're going to get started and that I'm going to record this program today. My name is Kate Kwaimoku, and I'm a board member for Women in Eco Artists Dialogue Directory, sorry. And today we have the pleasure of having Sophie Spiral doing a talk for us for art and activism. To see past episodes of art and activism, please visit our website at weedartists.org or our YouTube channel at Weed Artists. Art and Activism is a web series that explores the ways that artists are actively engaged in creating climate solutions and promoting sustainability. If you're interested in doing a presentation, please contact us at info@weedartists.org. We at Weed believe that art is a powerful tool for raising awareness and promoting social change. Today we have Sophie Spiral. Sophie uses pronouns they and them, is a dance researcher based in Berlin. Sophie facilitates playful workshops that deepen our connection to the earth and each other via embodiment practices such as interplay, somatics, and movement improvisation. Sophie sees these as connective practices that can serve as pathways towards collective liberation and healing. So I'm going to give the floor over to Sophie. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat during her presentation, and I will field them at the end.
Thanks so much, Kate. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me on your precious Sunday afternoon or morning, wherever you are. I'm in Berlin, in Germany, so it's actually 7 p.m. for me now. So I did enjoy a little bit of sun today, which was nice. And I hope you all are, I don't know, I'm really excited that this happened to be on the first day of spring. So it feels like there's a lot of seeds to be planting, and I'm sure you all are also really excited about whatever's to come. So I'm going to share my screen now so I can get the presentation going. All right. So some of you have known me for a while and probably know that I've been doing this work for quite a long time. But for those of you who don't know, I grew up in Berkeley in California, so that's partially sort of how I got connected to weed, despite the fact that I'm living in Berlin now. And I guess this work, I mean, it definitely relates to kind of things in my family and values that I grew up with in Berkeley. But I really started looking at this issue of climate change and the ecological sort of crisis in an artistic sense while I was at Berkeley High. And there I did an art show, so it was more visual arts at the time, about different approaches to communicate and talk about our relationship to Earth. And now, I guess it's like, let's see, 2011 is when I had that art show. So now it's 10 years later. I'm now focusing that work specifically on dance and embodiment. So how do we relate to climate justice issues through the body? And that's what my presentation is about today. And it's also what I'm currently writing my master's thesis on, which I'm finishing up this summer. So that's where the term dance as connective practice emerged, that we can really use embodiment practices to help connect us to Earth. So here's a little overview of what I'm going to talk about today. I like to start with my personal practice to situate my own positionality in my research, to give you a little sense of maybe why I'm so interested in this work and how it benefits me personally, and to show you just my progress or my development and journey as an artist. And then we'll have some little moments. Then I'll explain different kinds of embodiment practices and also share a case study of one artist, Anita Arlander. And then we'll have a little pause where we can practice some of the methods ourselves. I am often leading embodiment workshops, so I'll give you a little flavor, I guess, of what that looks like. and also so you can start to understand it in your body as much as like through the visuals and the ears and the audio sensory senses. And then we'll talk about colonialism and gender towards climate justice. So why I'm saying climate justice and not necessarily just climate change or climate crisis. And there I'll give an example from a teacher that I've been learning with who's based in India. And then we'll do a little practice to kind of integrate that learning into our bodies. And then that'll be it. And we'll have a good chunk of time, I think, at the end for questions. So yeah, if something comes to you throughout, you can stop and ask me. I'm okay with that too, but maybe also a good option would be to write it in the chat, and then we'll have it ready to go once we transition into that final section. So here we go. So here's a little video without sound, just so you get a sense of the quality of movement I've been kind of embarking on or developing this practice called Landscapes of Improvisation. I kind of named it that on a whim about 7 or 8 years ago when I started moving in outdoor spaces. So I realized I really enjoy dance improvisation, and I'm especially tuned in to how my body is moving when I'm in outdoor spaces. And actually, I started to realize that this is a form of meditation for me, and also a way to develop a deeper connection with the places where I exist or the landscapes that I exist in. And so yeah, it started 7 years ago. Since then, I've been slowly developing this practice of making sort of short dance films of myself dancing improvised in these different places. So this was obviously in the Bay Area, in the Bay, in San Francisco, but yeah, also I had done dances in the East Bay on Ohlone territory as well. So then this past year, I just wanted to share that I did manage to make a dance video for each season of the year. So that has been sort of my personal practice throughout COVID, and how I've also managed to survive this time. And I think it's brought an increased sense of appreciation and gratitude for me for this practice, because it was one of the things that actually stayed the same for me despite COVID. Even when folks were not able to go to the dance studio, I had my dance studio here outside in these places, and it also gave me a chance to spend time outdoors connecting with the land. And when I felt like I couldn't go far away, then I actually started to get deeper and deeper and closer to the land where I was existing now. And I think having COVID and having the restrictions of not being able to travel actually made me dive deeper into the local places where I exist. So this was in Neukölln in Berlin. I made sort of a video specifically during springtime and around spring, and about sort of the blossoming and blooming. And this was just located on the canal near my house, for example. So I always pick like one site and I return back to that site over and over again. In the summer, I did manage to travel, and I went to Croatia, and there I really was longing to be by the sea. So I made a video compilation of myself dancing just in different sections in the sea. And this particular place in Croatia is called Istria, and it also has a very interesting history. And I think just like through putting myself out there, I'm also opening a way to engage with obviously other species, but also with humans. And people will ask me questions like, what are you doing? And is this a performance, or what is this? And I always have interesting conversations and share that it's a meditation and a way for me to deepen my connection with that place, and also with Earth. So then in the fall and autumn, I did a piece about letting go and about sort of the leaves falling. And so I find that this practice also really helps me tune into each sort of moment that exists. And I'm really using the practice to tune into my body and to tune into each time. And here it was to tune into this letting go phase that fall brings for us every year. And yeah, in this case, though, I didn't go somewhere remote to film it. I literally just went outside my house and went and filmed in the park right next to where I live. So I went there every day and I tried to capture the changing season throughout November. I also did manage to travel again, but in Switzerland, I did a piece about snow. We did also have snow in Berlin, and I did manage to do some, but I thought it would be, it was definitely a bigger amount of snow. And I really enjoy, I think, just being able to have the dance be a reason that I'm out in these elements and connecting with the different aspects of Earth. And part of it too, though, is that I'm connecting with myself in that environment. So it's not necessarily about only paying attention to the environment, it's also paying attention to my body and how my body moves in that space as part of nature. And I'll get to that in a little bit. That's sort of where the theoretical side of things begins. So yeah, that was sort of an introduction to some of the artistic work I've created recently. And now I'll share a little bit more about what embodiment means. So I also love that the last art and activism presentation was about nature as a verb. And today, bringing movement into eco art activism is definitely about being a verb. And really, it's also about seeing the body as part of nature. And so as an artist, how am I using my body as a way to understand nature better and ultimately, and also a big reason for that is to not see nature as something that's separate from me, but that I am nature. So embodiment practices have been developing for a long time now. Here's a long list of just a few sort of that came to mind for me. I think it's becoming quite clear now that meditation and sort of mindfulness practices are really critical to our way of life. And also yoga has become quite universal at this point and is also considered an embodiment practice. I think the term embodiment kind of emerged as a way to create an umbrella term for a lot of these different modalities that were sort of happening in disparate places and didn't really have a sense of continuity. So there's been a way of trying to bring them together through this word embodiment. I am an interplay leader. So this is a method that started in Oakland in California about 25 years ago. So that's the main embodiment modality that I facilitate. And interplay really believes that we have these birthright practices, that dancing is a birthright practice that everyone has access to. And I remember growing up in Berkeley, there was this motto, it's like an African proverb. I don't know the specifics of where it comes from, but that if you can talk, then you can sing. If you can walk, you can dance. I feel like there's a third one I'm missing, but I definitely grew up with this belief that our bodies are instruments and we all have the ability to access that sense of creativity through them. And I guess here I'm also sharing that we have access to Earth through our bodies. So that's the research for me. And then we'll be talking about somatics today as well, which does derive from the Greek word soma, and it means the body in its wholeness. And this was also kind of developed, though, mostly by white Eurocentric or Euro-American men. And I think that's one of the reasons I tend to steer clear of the word somatics, but in the end, it means the same thing, I think, as embodiment. Then maybe you've heard of body-mind centering or 5 rhythms. Maybe you've been to an ecstatic dance. There's also Feldenkrais, which was started by Moshe Feldenkrais, who's Jewish and from Israel. Then there's Axis Syllabus, which is also a form of sort of being with the body and understanding it better on sort of an anatomical level. And then there's also been a lot of talk recently about how trauma is embodied, and this has been more in the psychology department. Maybe some of you have read this book, My Grandmother's Hands. So that's also an important part of climate justice, in fact, and also for me, embodiment. And I include hip hop in here because I do think that that's also an important embodiment practice. And I'm sure there are many more that we could include here. I also have done a lot of West African dance, and there's a lot of indigenous practices that could be included as embodiment practices. So yeah, I think it's important not to limit it to sort of, I don't know, things that are just current at the moment. I definitely believe that dance and movement have been around for a very long time. So in my studies, I came across this one artist named Anita Arlander, who's more, I didn't know about her until I came to Europe. She's, I think, Swedish, but does a lot of work based in Finland. And this one piece she did is called Resting with Pines in Nida, which was in Lithuania. And I just like this image. And for her, I think the work is really about the image. And they are videos that she's creating of herself essentially trying to connect with plants, and in this case, specifically with trees. And she does it really by being still. And she hopes that through her stillness, you'll get to sort of see the trees coming to life and moving more. So I think it's interesting how she used the aesthetics of contrast to try to create meaning about what does alive look like, what does aliveness mean, and how can we perceive plants in a different way, and really see them as relatives perhaps, or as other moving autonomous creatures. And I'm bringing her in today to really talk about this idea of kinesthetic listening. So as you all are listening to me right now with your ears, you're also kind of listening with your bodies. And I think that this is something that we haven't really utilized very much, or at least spoken much about in our societies. And I hope in the future it becomes more a part of how we learn. But so here's a couple quotes that talk about this idea of kinesthetic listening. So Loop is a queer artist from France. They say, perhaps the most beautiful thing that your body can give to the world is, oops, it's blocked for me, is in becoming capable of listening. And they have a really wonderful article about dancing as ecosystem service. So there is this idea that dancing and being able to listen is really of service to the earth and also of service to humans. And that we really need to develop a sense of embodiment in order to do that kind of listening. And then I hope many of you have read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Here's a beautiful quote from that book, and I'll just read it out loud as well. Maybe that's just how humans are, thinking too much and listening too little. Paying attention acknowledges that we have something to learn from intelligences other than our own. Listening, standing witness, creates an openness to the world. So this theme of listening keeps coming up for me, and I think that it's really an important part of our next sort of steps, or in this journey of how to relate to Earth and to be a part of Earth in a way that just kind of creates more openness so that we can evolve and move past sort of any kind of narrow-minded consciousness that prevents us from experiencing that expandedness. All right, so now I would love to invite you all to to do a little practice with me. And this will just be like 5 minutes since, yeah. So I invite you to just sit comfortably, however you are sitting, but maybe just try to relax or find a position that feels good for your body. And if you're comfortable, you can close your eyes, and I'll just invite 2 minutes of guided meditation. So it always starts with our breath. So wherever you are, just start to notice your breath. And when you're tuning in, you can start to lengthen your breath. I like to put one hand on my chest, one hand on my belly. Sometimes we're so preoccupied with thinking about how to solve problems that we kind of forget to tune in. So this is a chance to tune in to where we are right now. And you can just try to be present with your body. There might be something that feels uncomfortable. There might be something that feels at ease. Try to just sense, like, how is my chest feeling right now? What can I sense with my breath? And since we're all muted, I invite you to exhale with a big sigh on your next exhale. So take a deep breath in and let it out. And do that one more time. Expressing with sound really allows us to release and come into the present moment. And stay with this sense of connection with your breath. What does it allow you to sense? What are you feeling right now in your body? And slowly, when you're ready, you can flutter your eyelids open. And try to think of one word that might encompass something that you tuned into at the moment. And if you're willing and able or interested, I would love it if you shared this word in the chat and shared it with all of us. And I'll just read these. Lovely, amazing, freedom, curly, spring, noise, warmth, calm, slow, restful, letting go, relaxed, grounded, cool, relax, release. Thank you. So that's sort of this moment of our collective body. So we have our individual bodies, and then we also have a group or a collective body. And yes, quiet, this can keep expanding. And that's a way to sort of think about ourselves as part of Earth, and if you want to call it nature. So next I'm going to just kind of dive in because we're already running out of time. But I hope you can listen maybe in a different way or try to notice how you're listening after that session. So another, yeah, so now we're kind of getting into the aspect of climate justice. Why climate justice? Why do we need that? And for me, what I've been researching, and here are 4 authors who have written about this topic, it really comes down to the separation, this sort of socially constructed separation that we feel from, well, we meaning mostly in sort of the Euro-Western centered space. So yeah, William Cronon was who I discovered or learned about in college. And this was really when I started thinking about, oh, this dualism that exists between humans and quote unquote nature or wilderness. And that in talking about nature as this thing that's separate from us, it really creates this paradox. And it also has created a sort of wound where we don't even understand that we are part of Earth. And then more recently, Charles Eisenstein wrote a book called Climate, A New Story, and then was really talking about these narratives, these stories that have been told in our societies and that have created the way we live today. So separation as being that one story that could then be shifted into a consciousness of interconnectedness, of interbeing, which comes from a Buddhist principle. Then Vandana Shiva, ecofeminist who wrote Soil Not Oil, also recently gave a talk about from separation to oneness. So I guess what I'm saying is this issue of disconnection is really critical and at the root cause of our climate crisis. And called You Belong, a call for connection. And there, Sabine is saying that much of our contemporary sense of not belonging can be traced to our disconnection from Earth. So that's essentially also why I started to name my work on dance about reconnection, about dance as a connective practice, as something that can support us in this journey to heal our separation and to begin the process of reconnecting or just remembering that sense of connection. So here there's sort of some main interconnections that are really critical, and I've just created this little graphic to explain how racism and colonialism are deeply interlinked with sexism and patriarchy, and also connected to the exploitation of our Earth, so the ecological extraction that's been going on for the last, I don't know, 1,000 years. And yeah, here's a lovely quote from an author who's writing mainly about post-colonial theory. Rolando writes, extraction, exploitation, and rape are part and parcel of the same system. So this is where, this is the book he's written, Vistas of Modernity. And I'm happy to share all these resources later. I can also share this presentation with anyone if you would like it. And yeah, I just really appreciate how he's talking about decolonization and really linking it to femicide, ecocide, and also racism and colonialism. So yeah, and that's why for me, I feel like talking about climate change needs to always involve the conversation of colonialism and how we can decolonize and move away from these systems of oppression, because this sense of separation or othering other species or other people is all at the root cause of our climate catastrophe. Take a deep breath. And a couple of years ago, when the Extinction Rebellion movement was really strong, I was walking around some of the camps and found this open letter that was written by the Wretched of the Earth Collective. And I found it was really well written. And I just wanted to share this one quote because I felt that they were making a call to action. And for me, dance and embodiment is sort of a way to respond to this call to action, to say, hey, what's the point in fighting climate change if we're not aware of these inequalities and this kind of structures of domination that persist? And so we really need diversity and a plurality of tactics and communities to be part of this transformative change. And for me, that's what dance is all about connecting and moving away from these sort of systems of domination. And by doing that, or one way to do that, I'm sure there are many more as well, but one way is to start developing and becoming in relation to ourselves, to each other, and really trying to understand what relationality in a sort of non-hierarchical way would look like or actually feel like. And here are two more quotes from Rolando from his book about decolonization. So by being positioned that is intersectionally and decolonially positioned, one does not come into a relative position, one becomes in relation. So this colonial structure really set us up into categories that said, okay, you're in a position in relation, like you're in a relative position, and it's always going to be some sort of hierarchy or box. And what he's advocating for is that actually we need to move from possession to relating, so that we're all sort of we're still separate to a certain extent, but that we're relating in a sort of pluralistic sense where my well-being is just as important as your well-being, is just as important as the tree's well-being, just as important as the turtle's well-being, and that they can come in their sense of diversity and difference without being already set up in a certain hierarchy. And here are just a couple things that we've already talked about. Listening, kinesthetic listening or kinesthetic empathy also can be developed through movement. And this sort of sense of relationality really is experimenting on a body level. How do we exchange energy? Also, how do I respond to something and feel empowered to respond and to actively respond? And also poetic correspondence. So there are ways in which we might be in relation with each other through the dance, through also a sense of poetics, through words, through language, with words or with the body. And this will come up in the second case study. So yeah, a way to describe this, and if anyone has read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, this is one of the main topics of her book, and it's reciprocity. And for me, I think this is becoming such an important term because it also then emerged in my somatics practice with Navtej, which will be the second case study. And reciprocity really means that there's balance between giving and receiving. It's not purely an exchange of energy or material, but a common understanding and commitment to give at least as much as one receives. And yeah, here I just put a couple books. So I've already mentioned two of them. One more is Spell Sensuous by David Abram. He also talks about reciprocity. And yeah, with Navtej in Abya Somatics, we're exploring this idea of reciprocity and how to experience it in the body. And I met Navtej because he came to Berlin to do a guest professorship for one semester. And I learned his method, which is a combination of yoga, somatics, and also informed by his classical Indian training in Bharatanatyam dance, and also his desire to include sort of a poetics and focus on word and writing as well. Yeah, I'll just move ahead on this for sake of time. So in his somatics practice, we're really bringing together yoga and also aspects of the Bharatanatyam and somatics. And he talks a lot about like sensuous, what are we feeling with our senses? How can we expand our senses? And he has talked about yoga as being quite an internal practice, and that dance is more of an external. And I'm sort of playing with those things. I think both could be internal and external, but the point is that this practice we're doing is mostly I'm doing it indoors, but I'm really looking internal to navigate and see my body as part of Earth. But I'm also learning to also be expressing and going outwards at the same time. And for me, this is huge in terms of how I relate to the environments where I'm moving and dancing. So here's just a little clip of what that might look like. Like the practice I'm doing with Masters is really also a space for performers and dancers to explore and be in their own bodies. And some of the topics we discuss are sort of the idea of rest and restlessness, of stillness and movement. And sukh and sukha is actually about finding comfort and pleasure and happiness within the body. And so I feel like this also really relates to reciprocity and feeling, oh, like I am receiving so much that I actually feel totally comfortable and content in this very moment. And I think this is really important as a radical counter to the consumerist society that at least I've been raised in. And so part of the practice is, I think, yeah, that's the end of the video. Part of the practice is about how to be in our bodies and how, like, learning how to be in relationality, in reciprocity within our own bodies, between different bodies, and also between our environments and ourselves. And let's see, yeah, that's just the last slide. So one example of that would be also how we engage the gaze. So actually, I'm sometimes gathering inspiration or letting my body be moved by what I sort of experience through my eyes or what's around me. But it can also be that I'm closing my eyes and then moving based on what feelings and sensations I have in my own body. Yeah, so this is our last, I guess I did, oh no, we're good on time, perfect. So yeah, this is our last little practice round, and I think I will stop my share for this section. And if you're able to, I would encourage you to put your Zoom on gallery mode. And if you want to turn your screen on at this point and participate, that's great, but there's no pressure to. And so I really want to give you a chance to just experience what this sense of reciprocity might feel like in your own body, despite the fact that we're going at this through the digital realm. But I still believe that there is a way to feel a sense of this connection and reciprocity through it. So I invite you to bring a hand into the screen, and you can start by just slowly moving your hand. Wonderful. And you can move it also in a quick sort of way. You can start to play with the different edges of the screen, leaving the screen, coming to the center of the screen. And we're starting to just explore and really get, this periphery of all the bodies that are in this room. If one hand gets tired, you can switch to the other hand. And you can also play with movements that are more jerky or still, making different symbols or shapes with your hand. You can play going between smooth and jerky. Exactly. And you can also make contact with your own body, because our hands are very caring, and they're often caring for other bodies, but they can also care for our own bodies. Exactly. And that's also where you can find a connection between maybe your two hands or your hand and your heart, and start to sense what that, you can imagine like a string between your hand and your heart, or your hand and your face. Exactly. And now move your vision to the space of everyone else in the room and start to follow someone else's movement. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It can just be like 80% of what they're doing. And try to follow someone else now. And now just randomly choose one person. They won't know who's following them, but just try to follow one person for the next couple minutes. And come back to your own movement. And follow that same person again. Awesome. And find one other person to follow. Yeah, there's a lot the body can communicate even without words. And give that a good shake. You can just shake that out. Thank you for participating in that. So there's a lot of ways to take that further. And if we were going to break out into sort of doing this one-on-one with each other, then there would be a sense of going back and forth and following each other, and really trying to also listen and sense, what am I receiving from this body or this other part of Earth, and what am I giving, not necessarily in return, but just that there happens to be this cycle, and this is one way that we feel the strength of that connection between us. So yeah, thank you so much. That's the end of the presentation, and thank you for listening and for participating and practicing the reciprocity with me. So we do have a good 10 minutes to do questions, which is really lovely, and I'm happy to take questions.
Yes, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and I will go ahead and unmute you. Awesome. It looks like we have Catherine Allen first.
Hello. Hi, everyone. That was really fun, Sophie. Thank you. I'm really curious about listening, and I heard some scientific thing recently about like when we listen, it's only like 10% of us focused on the words or something. So I was wondering if you've gone into that little rabbit hole about the types of listening. And I'll just add one more piece is that I'm also in a study group with My Grandmother's Hands, that book you referenced by Resmaa Menakem. And in part of the practice in that book is sharing with a group. And then we're really asked to reflect not on like the words and the story, but on the body language and just beyond the words. So that's been a practice I'm engaged in, and I'm just curious more about the whole listening. What more you want to expand on that? Thanks.
Thanks so much, Catherine. Yeah, it's definitely a huge field. I mean, one thing that emerges for me right now that I have been interested in and could still research more of, especially, I don't know the specific science facts of what you were saying about what percentage we're hearing and what part of our body is listening. But I definitely believe that there is more that we are listening to than audio senses. One thing that comes to mind is this idea of mirror neurons. I don't know if anyone else is familiar with mirror neurons. Yeah, sweet. They're really, really interesting. And I think that this plays a big role in essentially the mirror neurons is that there was some research in the 90s, and then it sort of got better and better that we actually can feel in our own bodies similar sensations and even intentions as like what someone else is doing. So if I'm dancing or if you're watching a dance performance, part of what makes it so engaging is that we're actually feeling a lot of those sensations in our own bodies, even as a witness or someone that's watching and not moving. So you don't even necessarily need to be moving to get a sense of what that feels like. I think this is quite powerful, and it does motivate me to keep dancing and doing dance, because I often question myself or question, what's the point of this, or is someone benefiting from it? And I definitely think same with what Luke was saying about dance as ecosystem service, so that actually dancing and bringing this kind of energy or also this practice of listening is a service to each other and to so I guess that's what I would share about the practice of listening, and that the mirror neurons also play an important role in that.
I'll just say one more thing is like, it's probably a whole new thing now that we're in the Zoom boxes and listening is like contained in the square, right?
Yeah, but we're definitely still feeling and sensing with our bodies. There's maybe less information than if we were in person. But I also, I've noticed that in some ways it's the digital also brings positive things to it for me.
Great. Looks like we have Peter Schultz.
Yeah, hi, Sophie. I'm wondering, actually following up kind of on Catherine's question about listening, how do blind people listen? How do deaf people listen? How do, people of different abilities listen, and how does it change? Like, how do they feel, smell, all the senses? That seems really fascinating to me.
Yeah. Actually, had I had more time, I would have included a third example by a dance artist named Zwazi Mears-Clark, who's based in Germany, but is, I think, Jamaican American. And I saw one of his works in 2018 where the whole dance performance was happening in the dark. And so as an audience member, you're also forced to basically, you're like, I don't see anything. Where's the dance performance? What's happening? And it was a really great experience. It totally transformed my understanding or expectation of what the actual performance was. And we did at one point get sort of led through the space, and there was contact. We had to be okay with making physical contact with other members of the audience. But his work is really about this question. And so he's working with visually impaired people, primarily in dance realm. And I started thinking about like, okay, how can dance actually expand our senses, our use of senses? And there's also a book about the tactile sense as being sort of like the mother of all senses. And so through this touch and tactile sense, we also have access to other forms of knowing that, I don't know, that could be expanded on more. And I was curious, I started thinking about this in the sense of how could we also listen and become more aware of other species, perhaps through expanding a sense, or like a sixth sense, perhaps. So yeah, I mean, I personally, I mean, I do have glasses, but I still see. So I don't have a personal experience with what listening might be like if I were completely blind. So I can't say that from my perspective, but I know that there are other folks who are really interested in that, and it's starting to be explored through dance.
Awesome. I put Zwazi's information and contact down here if anyone's interested in looking at their work. I have a question from Sharon. She wonders if, Sophie, if you've delved into your body biome, the microbes living in our bodies.
I love that question. Thank you, Sharon. That's beautiful. The first thing that comes to me actually is fermentation and food. So I do a lot of food fermenting, and I eat my own sauerkraut or pickles, or I make dosas. So actually I do think of that as my own, as a way to interact with my own biome. From a dance perspective, I'm not sure if I've made it to that micro level. But it's definitely a great, I mean, I guess it really depends on how we define the biome or the microbes, and I guess whether I even can sense them would be the first step in that process. I did have one professor who was wondering, like, oh, could you research like temperature in your own body as a way to like research climate change? And I did think that that was kind of an interesting way to interpret the research. I don't feel like there's an exact one-to-one, but I do feel like just the active sense of, or the practice of tuning into my body and trying to just understand it better and feel what it needs, maybe on a moment-to-moment. One way to try to understand like this biome, and then hopefully through understanding my own biome I can also understand the global biome better. So I hope that kind of answers your question. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Sharon. It's a great comment here by Meg. I love this approach about listening. Have been listening to Chaz, I think it's Charles Eisenstein, and really appreciate his and also your point in the connection between growing feelings of not belonging resulting in eco-destruction and all forms of othering. Listening is such
Thank
an
you for that, Meg.
Question from Martha, or comment from Martha Kane, with this last question about biome, I am reminded of a short essay from 1971 by Lewis Thomas, Lives of a Cell, worth a read.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Yeah, I haven't delved into the sort of cellular, I guess, exploration, and that sounds like a beautiful way to continue.
All right. Is there any other questions? All right. I want to thank you all for participating today, and Sophie, obviously, of presenting. I had such a great time this morning. I know other of us on the other side of the world are having a lovely evening, hopefully with some of that body movement. I want to also plug Sophie's workshops. It looks like you might be doing some of those later on in the year. So visit sophiespiral.com. I believe she's the same on her other platforms. We will also have this talk up if you know anyone or want to share this talk later. It'll be up on our YouTube channel next week. And if you want to contact Sophie, I think she said that she can, she'd like to offer her slides if anyone's interested. I just like to thank everyone. This is a presentation by Women in Eco art directory, WEED, and this is the 4th episode that we had in art and activism. We will be continuing on this next month, and we'll be sending some more info out. If you're interested in looking at any of the past episodes that we have, I did a talk on trash. Christina Bertea did a talk about art of playing with the rain. And most recently, we had Stacy Levy talk about art as a verb, collaborating with nature. Excellent follow-up for what we just heard today. All right, just want to thank everyone for joining us, and have a great evening or afternoon.
Thank you, everyone, for listening and practicing. And yeah, have a great rest of your day.